I've gone through a lot of equipment throughout the years as a photographer and videographer, but there's one piece of equipment that I have never owned until now. This is the Sigma 150 to 600mm sport lens for Sony E-mount. So I purchased this lens a couple months ago and I've been meaning to make a video about it, but I felt that I really needed to put it through some tests before I did that. So with that being said, this is my review of the Sigma 150 to 600mm telephoto lens. Now, before I get into it, I just want to mention that I have never owned a telephoto lens before, so I really have nothing to compare this to. This is all my own opinion, and I did my own research, which led me to choose this lens over some of the other lenses, and we're really going to break all that down in this video. But first, let me just talk about why I purchased this lens in the first place. The big reason is I wanted to switch it up. I have been shooting pretty wide lenses throughout my entire career, and telephoto was really out of my territory. But after sort of hitting a wall in my work, I decided to try something a bit different. Now, there are a ton of options out there for telephoto lenses, but the two that A, fit my budget, and B, seem to have great reviews were the Tamron 150 to 500 and the Sigma 150 to 600. Both of these are very close in price and range, except for, of course, the Sigma has an extra 100mm on the Tamron. But what really made me choose the Sigma is honestly just my own experience with Sigma lenses. I've had a few and they've been the best lenses I've owned. They're built very well, they perform great, and this lens is no different. Now, the first thing I noticed when I picked up this lens was just how solid it was. This thing is built like a tank and it's heavy like one too. This lens weighs in at just over 4.5 pounds, and you definitely notice it in your bag. Now, personally, I don't really mind this. I'd rather have a bit of a heavier lens to help offset my shaky hands when filming, so it's not a big deal. Now, speaking of camera shake, let's talk stabilization. This lens features Sigma's optical stabilization technology, which helps reduce camera shake, especially when shooting handheld at longer focal lengths. More on this later. And the last detail I wanted to throw in here is that this lens is built with a weather-sealed construction that can help with any kind of splashes or other elements you might encounter. Now, after using this lens and putting it through some tests, I can honestly say that I love it. It is such a fun lens to use, and it's such a great addition to my kit. In my recent video, I went to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to photograph and film the UP 200, which is a big dog sled race in the middle of winter. This lens stayed on my camera almost the entire trip. I had it out in below zero temperatures, out in the snow. At one point, we were out in a blizzard covered in wet snow, and this lens performed well the entire time. Now, let's talk about some cons. Number one, video stabilization. The stabilization is really not great for handheld shooting. There's a 1 and 2 setting, and out of the box, I noticed that number 1 performed the best, and 2 was really just too jittery. It was really overcompensating for the camera shake. Now, I will say that's kind of what you get when you purchase a non-native lens, so I wasn't really expecting this to be that great. The reason I still bought it is most of the time I'm filming on a fluid head tripod, so it wasn't really that big of a deal for me. Number 2, aperture. This is not a low light lens, nor should you expect it to be, but I do find myself wishing that it was a constant aperture instead of going all the way to 6.3. Again, it's still a great lens and it's not a deal breaker by any means. It still produces a great blurred background and has amazing compression. I will say though, you do need to keep dust off the lens. As you zoom in and your aperture increases, you can really notice every speck of dust on the front lens, so keep it clean. Now, the last thing isn't necessarily a con for me, but it might be for some. This lens does extend as you zoom in, and it does get pretty long, so you do need to make sure that you're careful when you're walking around. You don't want to hit anything. The good news is that there is a lock on the lens which will keep it from creeping when you're walking around with it. Now for my final thoughts. I love this thing. Is it the best telephoto on the market? No, but for what I do and for my budget, it was perfect. For me, this is really just a whole new experience with photography photography when shooting with this lens. The cool thing was when I was on this trip, when I was shooting the sled dogs, I was able to get really nice tight shots of the dogs without getting in the way of all the chaos around me, which was really cool. Hopefully some of you found this helpful. If you are looking into this lens or another lens, I highly recommend renting. Forget reviews, go rent it, put it on your camera, test it out, and decide for yourself. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, consider hitting that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.